"You want to put it in," she screamed. What the rancher did next outraged the whole town. The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, casting a warm golden light on the fields and hills that surrounded the small town. The town itself was quiet in the early morning, the streets almost empty except for the occasional dog barking or the sound of a distant tractor. Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a steady, familiar pace. It was a town built on farming and ranching, and its people took pride in hard work and tradition. Among them was Hank Thompson, a man who had lived in Willow Creek all his life and who had earned a reputation as one of the most hardworking ranchers in the area. Hank was in his late 40s, with a strong, weathered face that reflected years of sun, wind, and labor. His hands were calloused, the skin toughened from decades of handling ropes, feeding animals, and repairing fences. People in town respected him, not because he was loud or charming, but because he worked quietly, always showing up when needed and rarely complaining. His ranch was one of the largest in the area, stretching over acres of rolling hills and pastures filled with cattle. He took pride in every part of it, from the fields of hay to the sturdy barns that had been in his family for generations. On this particular summer morning, the air was thick with heat and the scent of dry grass. The sky was a clear, endless blue, promising another long day. Hank had planned to move a shipment of hay from one side of his property to another. It was hard work, and he had prepared himself for a long, tiring day under the sun. The hay bales were stacked high, heavy and awkward, requiring careful attention to move without damaging them or hurting anyone. It was a routine task, something Hank had done countless times before, but he knew that even simple tasks could become dangerous if people were careless or distracted. As he was making final preparations, Emily Carter arrived at the ranch. Emily was the daughter of a neighboring farmer, and she was well known in town for her spirited personality. She was in her early 20s, energetic and eager to help, though sometimes her enthusiasm could get her into tricky situations. Emily had come to Hank's ranch to help with the hay because she wanted to learn more about ranching, and she also wanted to prove herself as capable and hardworking. Her family had been in Willow Creek for years, and there was a long-standing, friendly rivalry between the Carters and the Thompsons over grazing land and farming techniques. While it wasn't serious, there was always a little tension whenever the families crossed paths. Hank noticed Emily walking up the dirt path, carrying a small notebook and wearing her sun hat tilted slightly to shield her face. She waved cheerfully as she approached, but Hank didn't return the gesture immediately. He was focused on the work ahead, calculating how to maneuver the heavy bales and organize the labor efficiently. "Morning, Emily," he said after a moment, his voice steady but tired. "Glad you could make it. It's going to be hot today, so make sure you stay hydrated." Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm ready, Mr. Thompson," she replied. "I want to help however I can. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm up for it." She had always admired Hank's dedication and hoped to learn from him, not realizing that today would be far more complicated than she had imagined. Hank led her to the first stack of hay bales, explaining carefully how to move them without causing damage. "You have to lift with your legs, not your back," he instructed, demonstrating the proper technique. "And don't rush. It's heavy, but if you're careful, it won't hurt." Emily nodded, trying to follow his instructions exactly. She appreciated Hank's guidance, though she couldn't hide a small nervousness in her eyes. As they worked side by side, the sound of their labor echoed across the fields. The thud of hay hitting the ground, the scraping of wooden carts on dirt, and the occasional call of a bird flying overhead. Hank kept a close eye on Emily, correcting her posture and movements, while Emily listened intently, trying to match his precision. It was slow work, but both of them were determined. Yet beneath the surface, there was a subtle tension. Emily wanted to do well and prove herself, while Hank wanted to maintain control of his ranch and ensure nothing went wrong. Around mid-morning, the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the field. Sweat dripped down their faces as the temperature rose, making the task even more exhausting. Hank paused to wipe his brow and took a moment to survey the work. "We've got a long day ahead," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to make sure everything is organized before noon. The last thing I want is a mess that takes twice as long to fix later." Emily nodded, trying to catch her breath. She had been moving hay for hours and was starting to feel the strain, but she refused to show it. "I can handle it," she said, her voice steady. She wanted Hank to see that she was capable, not just a girl tagging along who couldn't keep up. She didn't realize that her determination and her tone would soon contribute to a misunderstanding neither of them could have anticipated. Hank turned to give her another instruction, pointing toward the next stack of bales. "Make sure you line them up straight. If they tip over, it'll cause a problem for the whole shipment." Emily hurried to follow his direction, but in her eagerness, she misheard part of what he said. "You want to put it in," she shouted, referring to a bale that she thought he meant should be pushed onto the cart. Her words came out sharper than intended, laced with frustration from the heat and the heavy lifting. Hank froze for a moment. He had not expected that tone. To him, it sounded like a challenge, almost disrespectful, though Emily had meant no offense. The sound of her voice carried across the field, and the other farmhands working nearby glanced over, sensing that something unusual had happened. Hank's face tightened, his muscles tensing as he processed what he had heard. In that moment, the calm of the morning broke. The peaceful rhythm of their work, the gentle breeze, and the quiet of the town all seemed to vanish. Hank's reaction was immediate and instinctive, fueled by years of running a ranch on his own terms, where discipline and respect mattered. Emily, on the other hand, did not understand the change in his demeanor. She looked at him, puzzled and slightly alarmed, unsure of what she had done wrong. The tension was not just between the two of them. It was something the town itself would later notice and talk about for weeks. For now, though, it was just a moment on the hot summer day, one small misunderstanding that neither of them could yet predict would become the center of so much attention. The moment Emily shouted, Hank's heart skipped a beat. For a second, time seemed to freeze on the ranch. He turned to look at her, eyes narrowed slightly, trying to understand her tone. To him, the words sounded sharper than necessary, almost like a challenge rather than a question. He had spent his whole life running the ranch with careful precision, expecting people who worked with him to follow instructions without argument. Respect, to him, was not just about manners. It was about safety, teamwork, and trust. Hearing Emily's voice rise so suddenly, coupled with the heat of the day and the physical strain, set off a chain of emotions he hadn't fully controlled yet. Emily, on the other hand, did not see it that way. She had simply misheard his instructions in the noisy, hot environment. She was focused on trying to do the right thing, moving the hay as quickly and carefully as she could. When she realized that Hank's expression had changed, her own heart began to race. She wasn't used to seeing him like this. Hank Thompson was normally calm, patient, and quietly authoritative. Seeing him suddenly tense and alert was unnerving. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked cautiously, lowering her voice, but it came out almost as a whisper in the heat and the noise of the moving hay. Hank took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He rubbed the back of his neck and shifted his weight on his boots, looking around to make sure no one else was watching too closely. He hated the thought of losing control in front of others. But the moment of confusion was too strong, and before he could fully think it through, he reacted. He stepped forward quickly, moving the large hay bale with a force that startled both Emily and the nearby farmhands. The sound of the bale hitting the wooden cart echoed across the ranch, louder than anyone expected. The sudden movement caused dust to rise into the hot summer air, swirling around them like a thin cloud. Emily stumbled slightly, her hands brushing against the bale as it shifted. She gasped, startled by the unexpected force of Hank's action. "Whoa, Mr. Thompson, watch out," she called, her voice filled with a mix of alarm and concern. The heat and exertion made her words come out sharper than intended. She didn't understand why Hank had reacted so strongly. From her perspective, she was simply trying to follow instructions. Hank's face tightened further. He felt a mix of frustration and worry. Years of running a ranch had taught him that small mistakes could quickly turn into serious problems. A misplaced hay bale could damage property, injure someone, or create chaos in the organized system he had spent years perfecting. He had not meant to frighten Emily, but in that moment the concern for safety overpowered his calm judgment. "Hold still," he barked, his voice firm but not angry. He carefully guided the bale into place, making sure it was secure. The other farmhands nearby paused in their work, glancing at the scene with wide eyes. Some whispered to each other, unsure of how to react. It was unusual to see Hank lose his composure, even for a brief moment. He had a reputation for being steady and dependable, the kind of person who didn't shout or make sudden movements unless absolutely necessary. Yet here he was, reacting instinctively to what he thought was disrespect. Emily stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. She wiped her sweaty hands on her jeans, trying to calm herself. "I was just trying to help," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Hank's eyes softened a fraction, seeing the genuine concern and innocence in her expression. He realized that she had not intended to provoke him. He took another deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation and his own emotions. Still, the tension lingered in the air. The heat of the day, combined with physical exhaustion and the sudden misunderstanding, created a moment that felt larger than life. Emily looked down at the hay, then back at Hank, trying to gauge his mood. She didn't want to upset him further, but also didn't want to back away completely. Hank, noticing her hesitation, decided it was time to speak calmly. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice so the other workers wouldn't hear too loudly. "I know you're trying to help and I appreciate it, but you have to follow my instructions exactly. A small mistake out here can cause big problems." Emily nodded, swallowing nervously. "I understand, Mr. Thompson. I really didn't mean any trouble. I just wanted to do it right." Hank looked at her closely, recognizing the sincerity in her words. The initial tension began to fade, replaced by a careful awareness. Both of them realized that the misunderstanding had come from a combination of heat, noise, and exhaustion. It wasn't malicious. It was simply a moment of miscommunication. Despite this, the other farmhands continued to watch, whispering among themselves. Word traveled quickly in a small town like Willow Creek, and the story of the confrontation was likely to spread. Hank felt a flicker of worry, not for himself, but for Emily. He knew how quickly rumors could grow, how easily a single misunderstanding could be blown out of proportion in a town where everyone knew everyone. "Let's just focus on the work," he said firmly, trying to shift attention back to the task at hand. "We don't need anyone adding drama to a simple job." Emily nodded again, more carefully this time. She followed his instructions closely, making sure to line up the hay bales exactly as he had shown her. Hank moved beside her, guiding the process with precision, and gradually the rhythm of the work returned. The sound of labor filled the air once more, the scraping of carts, the thud of hay, and the occasional call of a bird overhead. The tension between them eased, though neither could forget the shock of the earlier moment. As the morning turned to afternoon, the sun rose high in the sky, making the work even more grueling. Sweat poured down both their faces, their clothes sticking to their skin. Hank made sure Emily stayed hydrated, handing her a water bottle every so often. "Take it slow," he said. "It's not about speed. We need it done safely." Emily appreciated his concern, though she still felt a small amount of lingering embarrassment from the earlier incident. She didn't want anyone to think she had been careless or disrespectful. Meanwhile, the nearby fields seemed to hum with life. Birds darted across the sky, cattle grazed lazily in the distance, and a soft breeze stirred the long grasses. Yet under the peaceful surface, tension still lingered. The small incident had revealed something about both of them: Hank's instinctive protectiveness over his ranch, and Emily's eagerness to prove herself. They were learning, in real time, how quickly misunderstandings could arise even among people with the best intentions. Around mid-afternoon, they paused for a short break. Emily sat on the edge of the cart, taking a deep breath, while Hank leaned against a fence post, wiping his brow. "I've been running this ranch a long time," Hank said quietly, almost to himself. "I've seen small mistakes turn into big problems." "I didn't mean to startle you, Emily. It's just sometimes I react before I think." Emily nodded, understanding more clearly now the pressures Hank faced every day. "I get it," she said softly. "I didn't mean to make things harder. I just wanted to help." Hank looked at her, realizing that despite the earlier tension, they were both learning something important about communication, patience, and respect. The sun blazed down on them, but the moment of understanding provided a small shade of relief from the heat. Even as they returned to work, both Hank and Emily carried the memory of that brief misunderstanding. It was a reminder that small words, misheard instructions, and sudden reactions could create waves far larger than expected. Neither of them could predict what the townsfolk would say or how quickly the story might spread, but they were determined to finish the work with care and professionalism. The hay bales were heavy, the day was long, and the sun was relentless, but both of them understood that the real challenge was not just physical. It was learning to work together, trust each other, and navigate moments of tension without letting them turn into lasting conflict. By late afternoon, most of the hay had been moved, and a sense of accomplishment began to settle over the ranch. The earlier incident, while stressful, had forced both Hank and Emily to adjust, to communicate more carefully, and to respect each other's perspectives. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. It was a beautiful, quiet moment of reflection after a long, hard day. And yet, even as the day ended peacefully, neither Hank nor Emily could forget the intensity of that brief misunderstanding. It had shaken them, challenged them, and reminded them of the fragility of communication and trust. They had survived the day, completed the work, and learned a valuable lesson about patience, awareness, and human nature. The ranch, with its endless fields and timeless traditions, had tested them, and in the process, taught them something they would not soon forget. By the following morning, the events at Hank Thompson's ranch had already begun to ripple through the small town of Willow Creek. In a town as tight-knit as this, news traveled faster than the wind through the fields. Even the smallest incident could become the talk of the town within hours, and yesterday's misunderstanding between Hank and Emily was no exception. Neighbors whispered over fences, farmers mentioned it while tending their livestock, and the local storekeepers exchanged knowing glances when someone brought it up. Everyone seemed to have a slightly different version of what had happened, and with each retelling, the story grew more dramatic than the actual events. Hank, however, was largely unaware of the growing attention. He focused on the ranch and its daily demands, knowing that the work never stopped for rumors or gossip. By mid-morning, he was already supervising the care of the cattle, checking fences, and making notes about upcoming hay shipments. His mind wandered briefly back to the incident with Emily. He replayed it carefully, thinking about what he could have done differently. Despite the heat and the physical strain of the previous day, he couldn't shake a small feeling of unease. It was not just about the misunderstanding itself. It was about how quickly things could escalate when words were misheard or intentions misunderstood. Meanwhile, Emily returned home, still feeling a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had helped with the hay, learned more than she expected, and survived Hank's strong reaction without any real harm. But she also knew that small-town gossip would likely paint the event differently. Already her friends at school and neighbors were asking questions, some curious, others judgmental. "Did you see what happened at the Thompson Ranch?" one of her friends asked. "They say you yelled at Hank and he almost lost his temper." Emily had to smile faintly, knowing that the story was being exaggerated, yet she felt a flicker of worry about what people might think of her. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had reached the local cafe, a small wooden building at the center of town where farmers, ranchers, and townsfolk gathered to drink coffee and discuss news. Word of the incident spread quickly among the patrons. "I heard Emily yelled something at Hank," said one man, shaking his head. "Hank doesn't like that kind of talk. He's always been calm, but I think yesterday really set him off." Another woman leaned in, lowering her voice dramatically. "They say it got heated and people were worried something might happen. Can you imagine? Hank Thompson losing his temper." The cafe buzzed with speculation, each retelling adding tension to the story. Hank, unaware of the growing drama, continued his work, but he began to notice subtle changes around him. A few neighbors avoided eye contact, and some of the farmhands seemed unusually quiet. He had always been respected in Willow Creek, but now he felt an unfamiliar sense of scrutiny. It wasn't that anyone was openly hostile. It was just that people were watching more closely, waiting for the next move, or trying to figure out what had happened from what they had heard. Hank realized that the story was no longer just about him and Emily. It had become something larger, a reflection of the town's tendency to judge quickly and gossip freely. Emily, too, became more aware of the town's attention. She noticed the way people looked at her as she walked past the fields or visited her family's farm. Some whispered behind her back, and others asked her carefully phrased questions about what really happened. She tried to answer politely, but she felt a growing weight of responsibility. She had not meant for the incident to become such a spectacle, yet she realized that in a small town, even the smallest actions could take on a life of their own. By evening, the situation reached the local newspaper office. Willow Creek had a modest paper that covered community news, events, and human interest stories. Journalists there had caught wind of the incident at the ranch and decided to run a short piece. The article described the misunderstanding, emphasizing the tension between Hank and Emily, and using dramatic language to attract readers. "Rancher and young helper clash in heated hay incident" was the headline, and although the story was based on facts, the wording made it seem more dramatic than it had actually been. The paper circulated quickly, and soon, everyone in town had at least a version of the story in mind. Hank first heard about the article when one of his farmhands handed it to him during lunch. He frowned as he read it, noticing how the words made the situation appear more serious than it was. "They're making it sound like a fight," he muttered, shaking his head. He was not angry at the paper, but he was frustrated at how a simple misunderstanding had turned into a public spectacle. Hank knew that this kind of attention could be dangerous for Emily, who had only been trying to help, and he wanted to protect her as much as he could. At home, Emily also read the newspaper and felt a mix of emotions. She was frustrated that her innocent mistake had been blown out of proportion, but she also understood that this was the nature of small towns. People loved a story, especially one that involved drama, tension, and well-known figures like Hank Thompson. She knew that she had to handle the situation carefully, showing maturity and patience, even if others were exaggerating or misjudging her. The days that followed were marked by subtle tensions around town. Conversations paused when she or Hank walked by, and people glanced curiously at both of them when they were seen together. Despite this, Hank and Emily continued their work at the ranch. They maintained a professional attitude, focusing on moving the remaining hay, tending to cattle, and completing daily chores. Hank made a point to ensure Emily felt safe and included, reminding her of proper procedures and reinforcing that he trusted her abilities. Emily appreciated this, though she remained aware of the whispering eyes around her. One afternoon, a small group of townsfolk visited the ranch under the pretense of checking on supplies or offering help, but it was clear they were also curious about the situation. Hank greeted them politely but firmly, keeping the focus on the work. Emily assisted with chores, staying calm despite the attention. The visitors watched silently for a while, then eventually left, satisfied with the performance they had witnessed. It was an awkward experience, but it also taught Emily how to maintain composure under scrutiny, a skill she realized would be necessary in Willow Creek's closely connected community. Hank reflected on the incident often, thinking about how a single misunderstanding could escalate so quickly. He realized that while he valued respect and caution on the ranch, he also needed to find ways to communicate more clearly and calmly, even in stressful situations. Emily, too, learned the importance of patience, careful listening, and staying composed under pressure. Both of them grew, in small ways, from the experience. The townspeople continued to discuss the event for weeks, some with sympathy for Hank, some for Emily, and some who simply enjoyed the drama. But slowly, as days passed and no further incidents occurred, the tension began to fade. People's curiosity was satisfied, and life returned to its normal rhythm. Yet, the incident remained in memory, a story that would be referenced occasionally whenever conversations turned to misunderstandings or moments of miscommunication. Hank and Emily's relationship also began to shift. What had started as a moment of conflict gradually transformed into mutual understanding. They had learned to read each other's intentions more clearly and to respond with calmness instead of reaction. Their shared experience created a quiet bond, built not on words alone, but on the understanding of each other's perspective and the challenges of working in a demanding environment. By the end of the month, the hay had been fully moved, the cattle were in good condition, and the ranch was operating smoothly once again. The town's whispers became less frequent, replaced by everyday concerns and the usual routines of Willow Creek. Hank and Emily continued to work together, their collaboration stronger than before. The incident, while dramatic in memory, had ultimately taught both of them lessons in patience, understanding, and the importance of clear communication. Though the story had created tension in the town, it also highlighted the resilience of small communities and the ability of individuals to learn and grow from mistakes. Hank and Emily had faced scrutiny, miscommunication, and pressure, but they had endured, coming out stronger on the other side. In Willow Creek, life moved on as it always did, but the incident at the ranch remained a reminder of how easily misunderstandings could spread, and how courage, patience, and empathy could resolve even the most tense situations. The tension that had lingered in Willow Creek for weeks finally began to reach a breaking point. Hank Thompson had been quiet about the incident, focusing on his ranch work and trying to let the gossip fade on its own. Emily Carter, meanwhile, had done her best to carry on with her life, but she could feel the weight of the town's attention every time she stepped outside. Both of them knew that the whispers, rumors, and misinterpretations would not disappear completely unless they addressed the situation directly. It was time for a conversation, one that neither had taken seriously until now, but one that would ultimately change the way the town saw them and how they saw each other. One late afternoon, Hank decided to invite Emily and her family to the ranch. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the fields. The air was warm but calm, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees near the barns. Hank had prepared the ranch for their visit, cleaning the barns, straightening the hay bales, and ensuring everything looked orderly. He wanted the meeting to be productive, not confrontational. Emily arrived with her parents, carrying a small basket of refreshments as a gesture of goodwill. She was nervous but determined. She had spent days thinking about the best way to explain herself and ensure that Hank understood she had never meant to offend him. Her parents, experienced farmers who had known Hank for years, encouraged her to speak openly and honestly. They understood the value of direct communication and the importance of clearing the air before misunderstandings became permanent. Hank greeted them politely, shaking hands with Emily's father and nodding respectfully to her mother. He offered them seats near the barn, where the late afternoon sun provided soft warmth. For a few moments, there was silence, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional rustle of wind through the fields. Hank knew the conversation needed to start carefully. He didn't want to make Emily feel defensive, but he also wanted to express his perspective. Finally, Hank spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Emily, I want to talk about what happened at the ranch the other day. I want you to know that I understand you didn't mean any harm. It was a misunderstanding, but I also need you to know why I reacted the way I did." He paused, letting his words sink in. Emily nodded, meeting his gaze steadily. She could see the honesty and thoughtfulness in his eyes, and it gave her the courage to speak openly. "I understand, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "I really didn't mean to upset you. I misheard what you said, and I said it in the wrong way. I was trying to help, but I can see now that it came across differently than I intended. I'm sorry for that." Her voice was sincere and her body language, slightly leaning forward, hands clasped in front of her, showed that she meant every word. Hank's expression softened. He could see that Emily's apology was genuine, and he felt a sense of relief that she was willing to acknowledge the misunderstanding. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "I know you didn't mean any disrespect. I reacted quickly because I'm used to working in situations where small mistakes can have big consequences. I shouldn't have startled you the way I did, and I want to apologize for that as well." His words carried the weight of experience and reflection. Emily's parents exchanged approving glances. They could see the maturity and care in both Hank and their daughter. It was clear that this conversation had the potential to resolve the tension, not just between Hank and Emily, but for the town as a whole. Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. The burden of misunderstanding, which had weighed on her for weeks, began to lift. The conversation continued, with both sides sharing their perspectives calmly. Hank explained the pressures of managing a large ranch, the risks involved with livestock and heavy equipment, and how even small errors could lead to serious problems. Emily listened attentively, asking questions to better understand his point of view. She realized that his quick reaction was not personal. It was a response shaped by years of responsibility and care for his property and animals. In turn, Emily shared her perspective. She explained how she had been nervous, eager to help, and genuinely focused on doing the task correctly. She admitted that her words had come out more sharply than she intended because of the heat and the physical effort of moving the hay. Hank listened carefully, nodding as he absorbed her explanation. By the end of the discussion, both of them had a much clearer understanding of each other's intentions and motivations. Hank then suggested a small activity to reinforce their understanding and rebuild trust. He asked Emily to help him move a few light hay bales together, step by step, while he guided her through each movement. It was a simple task, but it allowed them to communicate, coordinate, and work side by side without tension. Emily found herself smiling as she followed his instructions carefully, appreciating the patient way he explained each step. Hank, in turn, noticed her growing confidence and skill, and he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that she had learned from the experience. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow across the ranch, the atmosphere shifted from tense to calm. The conversation and shared activity had created a bond between them, one built on understanding, respect, and a willingness to listen. Emily realized that misunderstandings were natural, especially in busy, high-pressure environments, but they could be resolved through honest communication and patience. Hank understood that trust and guidance were just as important as discipline, and that taking the time to explain things could prevent future conflicts. After the activity, Hank invited Emily and her family to sit on the porch of the ranch house for a small meal. They shared stories of past ranch experiences, funny mishaps, and lessons learned over the years. Laughter filled the air, replacing the tension that had dominated the past weeks. Emily's parents commented on the growth they had seen in both their daughter and Hank, noting how the incident had ultimately brought them closer together in mutual respect. By the time the evening ended, a sense of closure had settled over the ranch. The misunderstanding that had caused so much stress and gossip had been resolved through honest conversation, patience, and empathy. Hank and Emily had not only cleared the air, but had built a stronger working relationship and a newfound trust. The incident, once a source of tension, had become a teaching moment, demonstrating the importance of communication, understanding, and humility. The next day, life in Willow Creek began to return to its normal rhythm. Word spread that Hank and Emily had resolved their misunderstanding, and the townspeople slowly shifted their focus back to daily routines and other events. Some were relieved that the situation had ended peacefully, while others marveled at how quickly calm and understanding had replaced tension. Hank and Emily, meanwhile, continued their work on the ranch, now with an unspoken sense of teamwork and trust that made their labor more efficient and harmonious. Looking back on the experience, both Hank and Emily realized that the turning point had come not from anger or confrontation, but from taking the time to understand each other's perspectives. They had learned that patience, empathy, and honest communication were far more powerful than fear or frustration. The ranch, with its endless fields and traditions, had tested them, but it had also provided the opportunity for growth, understanding, and connection. By the end of the week, the story of the misunderstanding had become a symbol in Willow Creek, not of conflict, but of resolution. People referenced it as an example of how patience, humility, and dialogue could resolve even the most tense situations. Hank and Emily's relationship remained strong, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of learning to navigate misunderstandings. The incident had taught them both valuable lessons about human nature, the importance of careful listening, and the power of clear communication. And so, as the sun set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows over the fields and barns, Hank Thompson and Emily Carter worked side by side, not as individuals burdened by conflict, but as partners who had grown through the challenge. The town slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, the gossip faded, and the lesson remained clear. Misunderstandings, no matter how dramatic they seem, can be resolved with patience, honesty, and a willingness to see the world from another person's perspective. The days following the conversation at the ranch were marked by a calm that had not been felt in Willow Creek for weeks. Hank Thompson and Emily Carter had resolved their misunderstanding, but the events of the previous month had left a mark on the town. News of their reconciliation traveled slowly but surely through the small community. People were curious to see how things would unfold now that the tension had ended, and for the first time in a while, there was a sense of quiet anticipation instead of whispered gossip. Hank returned to his routine with renewed focus, tending to the ranch with a sense of satisfaction that came from resolving a personal conflict. He noticed that the farmhands seemed more relaxed around Emily, no longer cautious or wary of sudden outbursts. The rhythm of daily work flowed more smoothly, as if the air itself had lightened. Hank reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that leadership was not only about maintaining order and discipline, but also about fostering understanding, patience, and trust. The incident with Emily had reminded him that even small moments of conflict could teach valuable lessons if approached with the right mindset. Emily, too, felt a sense of freedom she had not experienced before. She approached her work at the ranch with renewed confidence, knowing that her efforts were respected and appreciated. The experience had strengthened her skills, but more importantly, it had taught her the value of patience and careful communication. She realized that her eagerness to help, while admirable, needed to be balanced with awareness of how words and actions could be perceived by others. Emily felt proud that she had managed to navigate the challenge without letting frustration take over, and she understood that her growth extended beyond physical skills. It was about emotional intelligence and resilience. The townsfolk gradually began to notice the change as well. Conversations in the cafe, at the market, and along the main street shifted from speculation about the incident to admiration for how it had been handled. Some remarked on Hank's fairness and Emily's maturity, while others commented on how the experience had strengthened the bond between the two. The incident, once a source of tension and gossip, had become a positive example of how conflict could be resolved with respect and understanding. It was a story that parents shared with their children and neighbors referenced when discussing disagreements or misunderstandings. One afternoon, a small group of residents visited the ranch, not out of curiosity, but to offer their congratulations. They wanted to see firsthand how Hank and Emily were getting along and to acknowledge the resolution. Hank greeted them warmly, and Emily joined him, smiling as she showed them the improvements she had helped implement around the ranch. The visitors were impressed with the efficiency and harmony they observed, noting that the ranch seemed more organized and positive than ever before. This public acknowledgement reinforced the sense of closure for both Hank and Emily, as well as for the town itself. As the summer progressed, the ranch continued to thrive. Hank and Emily worked side by side, managing the cattle, maintaining fences, and organizing hay shipments. Their collaboration became more intuitive, built on the trust and understanding developed during the reconciliation. The work, once marked by tension and miscommunication, now carried a rhythm of mutual support. Hank began to mentor Emily in more advanced tasks, teaching her techniques that had been passed down through generations of ranchers. Emily absorbed the knowledge eagerly, her confidence growing with each lesson. The incident also had a ripple effect on the community. Other young helpers in Willow Creek saw the benefits of clear communication and patience, inspired by how Hank and Emily had handled the misunderstanding. Parents used the story as an example to teach their children about responsibility, respect, and problem-solving. Farmers and ranchers discussed it at meetings, emphasizing the importance of empathy and calmness in resolving conflicts. In this way, a potentially negative event had been transformed into a source of learning for the entire town. Despite the positive outcome, both Hank and Emily remained mindful of the challenges they had faced. They knew that misunderstandings could still happen, and that the pressures of work, heat, and exhaustion could easily escalate tensions. They made a silent pact to communicate more carefully, to check in with each other when uncertainty arose, and to always prioritize safety and understanding over frustration. This awareness strengthened their partnership and set a new standard for how tasks were approached on the ranch. As the weeks passed, the story of the incident faded from the town's immediate attention, replaced by seasonal work, community events, and the usual routines of Willow Creek. Yet, the lessons learned remained. People continued to reference the event when discussing communication and conflict, but now it was told with admiration rather than judgment. Hank and Emily became symbols of how misunderstandings could be resolved through dialogue, patience, and mutual respect. The town, in turn, became a little closer-knit, having witnessed the positive resolution of a potentially divisive situation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Hank and Emily stood together near the barn, watching the cattle graze peacefully in the fading light. The air was calm and the quiet was comforting after weeks of tension and uncertainty. Emily turned to Hank, smiling with genuine warmth. "I'm glad we talked," she said softly. "I learned a lot from this, not just about ranch work, but about patience and understanding." Hank nodded, a rare smile appearing on his weathered face. "Me too, Emily," he replied. "It's not always easy to see things from another person's perspective, but I'm glad we took the time to do it. This ranch, this work, it's important, but so is the way we treat each other. That's what really matters." In the days that followed, Hank and Emily's relationship continued to strengthen. They collaborated seamlessly on ranch tasks, shared small moments of humor, and supported each other through challenges. The mutual respect they had built became a foundation for a lasting partnership, one that extended beyond work and into a genuine friendship. Emily found herself more confident than ever, not only in her abilities, but also in her capacity to handle challenges with composure and grace. Hank, in turn, felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that he had helped mentor someone who could carry forward the traditions and values of the ranch responsibly. The community, too, benefited from the resolution. Willow Creek became a place where small conflicts were increasingly addressed with dialogue rather than speculation. Neighbors began to emulate Hank and Emily's approach, taking the time to understand one another before passing judgment. The story of the incident at the ranch became less about the dramatic moment itself and more about the positive lessons that had emerged. It served as a reminder that patience, honesty, and empathy could transform tension into growth. By the end of the season, the ranch was in excellent condition. The hay had been stored safely, the cattle were healthy, and the fields were well maintained. Hank and Emily had completed their work efficiently and harmoniously, their partnership stronger than ever. The lessons learned from the misunderstanding had become a part of the daily routine, influencing not only their own behavior, but also inspiring others in the community. As the sun set on Willow Creek one quiet evening, Hank and Emily stood side by side, looking out over the rolling fields and the barns that had seen generations of work and dedication. The events of the past month, once a source of stress and tension, had ultimately led to growth, understanding, and stronger bonds, not just between Hank and Emily, but within the entire community. The town had witnessed firsthand how conflicts could be resolved with patience, empathy, and honest communication, leaving behind a lasting legacy of respect and learning. In the end, what had begun as a brief misunderstanding became a story of resilience, growth, and human connection. Hank Thompson and Emily Carter had turned a tense moment into an opportunity for learning and collaboration. Willow Creek, once filled with whispers and speculation, had moved forward with admiration for the way the two had handled the situation. And as the night fell over the quiet town, the ranch stood as a testament to the enduring power of understanding, trust, and respect, the very values that had transformed a simple misunderstanding into a lesson that would last for years to come.